Okay, well, let's get going. I'm sure there'll be some people that'll join us after, but they'll have to catch up or ask some questions afterwards.
Yeah.
So thanks for everybody for joining us and taking some time out of your day. It, certainly, Peter, if you can mute everybody except for me.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the business of being a private investigator. So a lot of what everybody's focused on is getting a license and education, but there's also a business associated to it, which has an effect on everybody's career, especially early on. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Why isn't there a clear path for becoming a private investigator? Talk a little bit about that. And perspective is everything. So we're going to hopefully provide you with some information that the 100 course will provide you with some perspective going forward, which I think is crucial. And talk a little bit about investing in training and your PI education. So introductions, I'm Sean Cote. I'm an instructor, co-founder, president and CEO of Novel Data Investigative Learning, and also president and CEO of New Data Risk Solutions and Investigations. I've been an investigator for 23 years. I've bought and sold companies in this space. I've traveled domestically, internationally, conducting investigations. Peter Sandrew, which most of you connect with regularly on email, is in the chat there. You'll see Peter on video. He's a co-founder. Him and I created all the content together over the last several years. Vice President of Novel Data Investigative Learning and General Manager at New Data Risk Solutions. Peter's been an investigator for 12 years, going on 13, and he's spent more than a decade conducting investigations and working with different security aspects around the world and with corporations, law firms, government agencies. And Peter has assisted in creating numerous investigative security training programs outside of Novel Data. So what are our values? When Peter and I got together to take this adventure on and start this company, we really sat down and started with the premise of what are we going to be about before we even got into creating content. And these are the values that we really wanted to frame everything that we did with. Passion, obviously. I think for those of you that maybe aren't in the space, or have had struggles looking for information out there regarding becoming an investigation, I think you certainly have to have a passion for it in order to get into it, because creating a business around it's a lot harder than it probably appears. And just writing content, much like any of us who aspired to write a book or want to write a memoir, it's a lot of work, and you're not really sure what the outcome will be, but you definitely have to have passion if you're going to take that journey. And I think that's where Peter and I were. Certainly passionate about the investigation side of things, but then on the teaching side, we were passionate to turn what we thought we knew and try and create a clear path for people to get into the industry, and also try and pass on some knowledge. Integrity, if you're going to be an investigator, if you're going to do anything, I think integrity is a key component, and obviously honesty. Purpose, again, what is your purpose? Being an investigator, in my opinion, is very purposeful. Even for insurance companies or individuals or corporations, there's always a reason why they come to us. It's usually because they can't go anywhere else. And it gives you a great sense of purpose, helping provide solutions to clients and customers. So service to others, again, I think that goes in part. Creativity comes into the job at every turn, every day. It never ceases to amaze me how much creativity is constantly evolving. As an investigator, things are always changing, and you have to be creative. That spirit of adventure, obviously, if you're doing mobile surveillance or active surveillance, or even outside the office, even from a computer these days, that spirit of adventure is always a component of what we do. Innovation, I think if you're an investigator that's been around for quite a while, you've had no doubt had to adapt to and innovate using technology, and certainly we'll talk a little bit about that today. And tenacity. Yeah, I think it's at the core value of investigators. If you're not tenacious, if you're not willing to put in that extra effort, you'll probably be on the short side of results more often than not. And courage, not the courage to jump into a burning building. That's one type of courage and certainly a component of it. But I think a courage to be self-aware, to continue to develop yourself, to know when you're wrong, to look at your mistakes and to learn from others. That kind of courage is what we're talking about. So the business of being a private investigator. So I want everybody to understand a little bit more about the business and why that's important. I'll talk about that, and you can ask some questions. But the main reasons are misconceptions. So you need to know what you don't know, right? there's a lot about what the ICPI 100 will teach you, and it's designed to do that because most of everybody's impression of being an investigator is predicated on the media and TV or film. And so there's a lot more than what we do than what's depicted there, and sometimes in a very different way. So I think that's important. The different areas of specialization, the investment in time and money, and do you have what it takes? So time, focus, and energy. So a lot of people come originally to us, or I've heard over the years, they just want to get my license. And so the licensing is a super important part of it, but it doesn't guarantee that anybody's going to hire you. The license alone is an important regulatory process, but it does not qualify you as an investigator. So who does the ICPI 100 and its contents benefit? So the new and aspiring investigators, and this is a big component. I have people that call me all the time, and they want to go on to the 101, or they want to go on to some other more advanced training because of some of the skills that they have, because of some of the industries that they come from. And as much as I, am always happy to hear them wanting to go on and do other training, especially the more expensive training, I always encourage them to take this. And there's one of the main reasons, especially with dealing with ex-law enforcement or even people with more specific skill sets, is that it demonstrates to the employers who are potentially looking to hire you that you know what you're getting into. The content in the 100 is designed both for you as well as the employer or someone that you're going to potentially work for. And we'll talk a little bit about the risk of hiring new and aspiring investigators. And the firm that needs to hire you, again, both you and the firm, you need to have that perspective to know which direction you're going, what the opportunities are, and make those early decisions that are going to benefit you, but at the same time demonstrate to those prospective employers that you know what you're getting into. So the investigation business is very much that catch-22 or a paradox. You need to get hired to get that experience, but you need experience to get hired. So I can't think of a better industry that has less clear direction than the PI industry. And so, what our goal here at Novel Data has been is to reduce or eliminate the risk to you getting hired by prospective employers. So, in the PI business, like it says here, you're only as good as your last file. What I mean by that is clients, more often than not, even ones that regularly engage with investigators, they understand what they're looking for. Maybe it's surveillance or an interview or a statement, and they have an expectation based upon working with investigators over time. But I think in large cases, they don't really understand what is being done, what the difference between company A and company B, and the quality of work. I think a lot of them, in my experience in talking with them and dealing with them, is they just figure it's a gamble sometimes. And so it shouldn't be a gamble. It should be predictable if done right, but they don't really have the time to put themselves in that perspective. And so, you're always as good as your last file. The pressure that puts on companies is that it's hard to hire new people because new people are going to make mistakes. There's a learning curve. And so the goal here with some of this training is to reduce that learning curve, give you the skills and the tools to reduce or eliminate the risk and make someone a little bit more attractive in the hiring process. So the ICPI is self-paced, it's online, and it's a distance learning platform. So everybody here today, anybody who wants to sign up later, they can sign up, they can pay the fee, get access straight away and start. So it's completely online and self-paced. It's not about getting the license. It's more about gaining the perspective based upon your limited knowledge and understanding of the business. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The course is about demonstrating to potential employers that are looking to hire you that you can that you're less of a risk. When investigators, when we're looking to hire new investigators, if I said to a client on the business side of it that I had a couple new people and I'm going to put them on their file, their immediate reaction would be, they're not interested in having new people work on their files. And most of the time, you're not going to have that conversation, but there is that risk element when you're working with new people, and that expectation from clients is that they just want results, and they too have that perspective, like I was mentioning earlier, where they just don't quite understand the nature of the decision making. They just look at the results. So some people take the course and decide that that they're not going to go forward. And for us, we're as happy with those individuals who decide not to go forward as those that do. And the reason being is there's a history within the industry, at least in my perspective, and some of the colleagues of mine, where you talk to at different conferences and whatnot, where they hire someone, they have good credentials, they're saying all the right things, they're worth taking that risk. They invest 6 months, maybe 8 months, sometimes even longer, only later that person to finally realize, I'm not interested. And so, rightfully so, without providing them that perspective in the beginning or the right information, those people naturally just realize this isn't the business that I thought what it's like, or it's not for me, or it doesn't work with my current life situation. And so the ICPI goes into great detail to explain, if you're really interested in surveillance, for instance, they're long days. If you have responsibilities with family, if you need to be somewhere at a certain time, surveillance isn't going to lend very well to that and a lifestyle that requires that. So these are the things that you'll learn, but that's just one discipline. So there's other things that that you can get into, and we'll talk about those in the course in more detail as well. So even if you feel like you're 100% sure you want to pursue becoming an investigator, I encourage everybody to take the course, because it would take me, the course is on average between 20 to 30 hours, depending upon the person. And so at least 20 hours for me to explain to you all the opportunities, all the challenges, the costs, the time frames, the learning curves, all that kind of thing. And once you have that perspective, who better to make a decision whether to move forward or not than yourself. Remember, this benefits you and the employer. I can't stress that enough. I think the first person you should be focused on is yourself, but as a hiring employer, working with new people, having hired hundreds of investigators over the years, someone that understands what we're teaching in ICPI 100 is hugely beneficial in terms of my concerns around, does this person really understand? Because if I don't tell you, or if you don't have that information, and 6 months later, we dump the time and resources, energy, and risk into you, and you decide that it's not for you, it's really not your fault. You've just evolved to an understanding and perspective that's taken more time, and at the end of the day, you're not into it. So we try and accomplish as much as that in the ICPI 100, both for your benefit, both for the benefit of the employer. Again, reducing or eliminating the risk for potential employers looking to hire new or aspiring investigators. The course cost is $249.50 US. Since there's no questions at this point, I'll just move on. The ICPI 101. So the goal with the 100 is to give you perspective, reduce or eliminating the risk of you getting into an arena here or pursuing things both monetarily and your time, as well as that of potential employers, giving you the right information, give the perspective. And then for those that decide that they want to go on to ICPI 101, that's where the real fundamental tangible skills come in. It's a much harder course. So, so again, we've not audited a whole bunch of other courses, as this slide's mentioning, nor do we claim to have all the answers, and nor is this the only path. But we have an international, we have intentionally done is created a course to create a solid foundation for you, build your confidence, reduce or eliminate the risk of hiring new aspiring investigators, and get you hired. So like going back to that catch-22, the reason why there isn't a clear path, in my opinion, to becoming an investigator, and why it's so difficult, and sort of this is our approach, is because it's that catch-22. People, there's so much risk associated to it, but you need experience to get hired, training, and good awareness, so that when you go through the ICPI 100 and the 101 and a couple of other courses, including the report writing course, that you're starting, at least you're competing very well against more experienced, maybe crossover skills from different industries, whether it be police or military. There's still a learning curve for those individuals, depending upon where they're coming from. And so the goal is to make you most attractive to employers, to get your foot in the door, to get that needed experience. But at the same time, like we talked about, you're only as good as your last file. We want to make sure that you have all the right information that benefits you. So when it comes to course content, some of you may have already been out there looking around at what courses are available. You've looked at what we have. I quite regularly get feedback from people who are looking at taking our courses versus other courses. And my question to them is, what do you notice about other courses versus what you've interested in us? Because I am interested to see what's out there. But more often than not, they're teaching about criminal investigations, interrogations, corporate espionage. And as much as corporate espionage is a component of what we do in the investigative side, or a component of what you might get into in your career, it's just not your everyday file, right? There's elements of a corporate espionage file. I have a meeting actually after this conference at 6 o'clock that has to do with some potential embezzlement. I have to go talk to them. I'm not sure what the case is about. It could take on all sorts of different things, from computer security to, physical security, to different types of investigations within it. So it's all encompassing. But if you're new, if I was, working on a file like this, I would bring in my most experienced people to help me with this, and highly specialized skill sets, of which, through the 100, you're going to realize where the specialties are. And so hopefully align yourself with things that resonate with you. We can't be experts at all of them, but certainly there's enough, I think, interest in a bunch of different areas where people end up being, specialists in 3 or 4 or 5, and some people more. But at the end of the day, teaching somebody new, in my opinion, about criminal investigations, there are firms out there that may specialize in more criminal related type of investigations. I have colleagues that, that's all they kind of do. That's their niche, former law enforcement, former homicide investigators that work on those types of cases. In my experience and in my career, they're just not common. They're not a case that I get a call for regularly. The bread and butter is the insurance industry, looking at potential fraud, doing interviews and statements, doing online investigations, corporate investigations. There's an element of fraud in a lot of those cases, but rarely do they ever get charged criminally. So it's really just a civil case. And so teaching about criminal investigations and criminal-like matters is really left to the police. And I always struggle with why it would add value to someone who's just entering the business. Down the road, if you get into a certain area where you are potentially supporting investigators investigating cases of a criminal nature, there's some other courses I've seen out there that could be a benefit. But when you're new, the goal should be just to align yourself with skills and training and awareness that gives yourself the best opportunity to be effective early on. And that's been our approach. So as much as criminal investigations or listen, as an investigator, a private investigator, I don't believe I've ever interrogated anybody. I think I've interviewed people. We don't have powers. Insurance claims, in some cases, they have to speak to you, but you don't have authority necessarily. There's some, shades of gray in there where if they don't speak to you, you could deny the claim, but usually they cooperate. But there's no real authority. There's no real threat. There's always that small element of fraud, but no one ever prosecutes for fraud. It's too difficult. It's too time consuming. And so really your skill of an interviewer is based upon your ability to communicate. It's certainly not an interrogation. So teaching you about interrogations when you're new, don't know the benefit of it. And just like that. So if you look at our table of contents, what we've done is really designed it to be able to be tangible skills to reduce or eliminate that risk. Everything focused on getting you hired. I think most of the people I talk to have so many transferable skills already that the issue isn't whether you're going to be good. The issue is getting you hired and you allowing yourself to focus on, for instance, in your area, if you said, well, I don't really have the interest in surveillance, but I really like cyber investigations. I really like interviewing. I like certain other types of investigations. So my feedback to you is great. Now you know what you want, and now the task is finding somebody out there who has that amount of volume of business, right? The business side of it, and go after them and make sure that you can get them to hire you, versus getting hired from a firm just because they like what you bring to the table. Meanwhile, 90% of their business is surveillance, right? So you really have to know what you're looking for, know what you're interested in, and know what you're passionate about, and then go after those employers. And depending on the market you're in, that may be more difficult if you're not open to 3 or 4 things. Some of the things maybe is not as the others, but my goal and hope for everybody is that they get hired. Get your foot in the door, get some experience, do a few things that you think you won't like so that you get that experience and you get your foot in the door, you get your foothold in the industry, and then it becomes a little bit easier to maneuver within and get hired and find other employers and build a reputation for yourself. So when we talk about table of contents, I encourage everybody, even everybody here today who hasn't taken the 100, who's looking at it, take this table of contents. It's on the website. look at it and compare it. The focus for us, and the reason why we provided a lot of information, I'll go back here, is because what we found, Peter and I, when researching, do we want to do this? Do we want to take this on? You know, the effort required to do it. If it was out there, we would just maybe align ourselves with those individuals. We couldn't find it, not in the way that we are approaching it. And so the reason why we put the table of contents, each one of these modules, if you will, like desk investigation, you know, how our desk investigation is performed, that's a lot of information just in 1A, 1B, you know, different file types. And so when you're doing the 101, unlike the 100, the 101 is our favorite way of doing it is live session. So it's usually 6 days, 12 to 13 hours a day. We provide meals for breakfast and for coffee and for lunch. Dinner, you're on your own. But usually what happens is everybody gets together and there's a lot of, you know, just sort of sharing backgrounds and experiences and getting to know some people. It's an exciting time. And that's usually over 6 days, pretty intense, a lot of information. So that's the way we're doing it with COVID. That's kind of on hold right now, especially with the way things are going these days. We'd hoped that things would have improved and we could travel a little bit easier, but that hasn't been the case. And so we're trying to hold off and get that program going where we can travel to certain states where other people can come up to Vancouver, because it is a nice destination city. When we do the classes in Vancouver, we open up to everybody in the world. So those from the UK or the US where their dollar goes farther, you know, come visit the city, come have a look around, take this course, make it a destination. We offer the course at Canadian equivalents when you come to Vancouver, right? Because that's what we do for the one. When we go to your area, it'll be in your local currency or US equivalent currency. And so that's the goal. That'll probably happen towards the end of the summer, I would guess, with the way things are going with vaccinations, if everything goes according to plan and there aren't any surprises. In lieu of that, the other formula, which was before Zoom became the thing that it is today with the pandemic, part of our platform was using Zoom. Zoom was something that we had incorporated using RingCentral from the very inception years ago, and we're going to do virtual classes. So much like this today, you know, we'll have an instructor, myself, Peter, there's a few other instructors that we have that will take you through that course. It's 3 days a week for 3.5 hours for 8 weeks. And we jump into the 3.5 hours because personally, you know, more than an hour, 2 hours on Zoom, I just, it's just hard to do. I just can't be as engaged. It's when you're live, it's a different energy level. Zoom, it's got its limitations. I love it. I think it's great because you can connect with people great, but we space it out in a way. And I took an executive coaching course that way, and it was the same sort of format. I thought that was perfect. 3.5 hours, you know, and we're offering it from usually 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon, our time, so that everybody in the UK can still jump on that, or different parts of the East Coast. It's a little bit late for the East Coast, but not too late. If you want to do this as a switch over from, you know, get your training and then look at it while you're still working, which is a lot of people's cases. So I encourage you to look at the table of contents and compare it to other courses you're looking to do. The goal really is to get you hired. The content, everything, the content that we're providing in the 100 is really, again, just about perspective, the business side of it, the cost of equipment, what kind of equipment you need. In this particular course, you're looking at daily gear protocols. There's a lot. There's in the surveillance side of things and the gear side of things, we go into grave detail as to why binoculars are important. It's things like it sounds trivially easy that binoculars are a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised how many investigators I've hired from other companies over the years who don't really have a good set of binoculars. And I scratch my head because without them, I wouldn't be, 50% as successful. 50% of the files I would be struggling on just because of the way we use them. And we go into detail as to why we use them. Rather than just say you have to have them and not explain why, we explain in great detail why this piece of equipment or why that piece of equipment is a must. And again, the goal is doing this for all these years, we've made all the mistakes. We've been in situations where, and I was working on a file just the other day without a backup battery system for my camera would run out of batteries just based upon the condition that I needed. The balcony of an apartment building was 18 floors up, and I didn't have an ID person that lived in an apartment. I didn't even have a vehicle. So the only way is to get them to come to the window or stand on their balcony, and now I have some sort of ID. Well, if you're in a vehicle, surveillance vehicle, and you're so far back, you can't hold a camera for 12 hours. Like physically, your body can't do it. And not only that is the tripod was here and the camera was shooting up and it was perfect. So I could still look out the front of the vehicle. I could still look at the thing, and then someone came into view, I could record it. So again, without a tripod, without a backup battery, without extra cables, all these things, when you talk about them without put them in the context, they sound, oh yeah, that's obvious, but context is everything. So a lot about this course is contextual. It's about storytelling. It's about connecting the dots, asking questions, and doing additional conversation in class. It's really great. It's a great time for us because more often than not, we have students asking questions of things that have happened that are really insightful. That's exciting for me because then you're really thinking along the same lines, or asking things that are new and developing that I haven't encountered. So it's a two-way street. We're always learning, and it's great to pass on knowledge, and we do gain a lot from those experiences as well. Surveillance vehicles, setting up surveillance. The surveillance side of it is a huge chunk of the business. It's one of those tools that seems to cross over in so many different ways. I always encourage people to try it before they say they don't like it, but some lifestyles and some certain situations don't lend well to it. I give you that. Talk about active, mobile, and two-person surveillances. Again, doing it by yourself, that's usually how we do it. Contrary to popular belief, we're not working in teams like law enforcement or certain government agencies that work in teams of 5 and 10. A 10-person team on the intelligence side isn't uncommon, but in the civilian side, when you have insurance companies paying the bills, they're not interested in 10-person teams and 10-person bills. They want one person, right? And that's just the way it is. And so it's a new set of skills. Even if you come from that environment, we have those people that come over, and I encourage them to take this course because the storytelling and the contextual side of it is going to help them a lot. They have a lot of transferable skills, but again, if you haven't done it by yourself, you haven't been in a lot of these situations that we can share about. So live in person, like I said, at the hotel with the coffee break, 6 days of instructions, that's the thing. So it took probably Peter and I to write the 100, I'd say, 6 months of full-time work at least, maybe a bit longer. And then on the 101, it's probably a year and a half. I mean, we are working while we're doing this, so put that into context. But the reason why it took so long is because there's so much, as an employer of investigators and having hired lots of people, this is everything I need somebody to know that's new, that you're kind of looking at that broad. Even if you're not doing surveillance, it's good to know because maybe you're going to end up being in the admin position and do cyber or whatever the case may be, depending upon the firm. But this knowledge is synonymous with the industry, and having this knowledge, talking about verify, identify, and expand, I call it viable. And what that is in many cases, just verifying the information that a client's giving you, and you'd be surprised. The client, you hear one thing, they say another thing, that happens to be an address. All of a sudden you're working on a file that has the wrong address. And by the time you figure it out, you put a lot of hours into it. And then at the end of the day, they don't really want to pay because now you're going to have to tell them that they made a mistake. You didn't. Maybe you made the mistake. So just the strict protocols on information transfer, data transfer, verify, identify, and expand. That goes on to, and we get into this in both the 100 and the 101, verifying who your subject is. Some of the challenges today with just investigating any one individual is separating them from a whole bunch of other individuals with similar names. And that's, social media. Most people are familiar with that. You're looking for a friend on Facebook. Is it the same John Smith? How do you know? And, that goes outside of social media. That gets into paid databases and where you find those databases and what are anchors. And we talk about anchoring information and then moving forward. But that gets into a lot of detail when it comes to that spot checks, the surveillance vehicle. This is a pretty meaty section in the 101. Fun for me because I think it's so interesting for a lot of people. Two-person surveillance. Like I said, live in person. COVID limiting. Where it was at when we sort of went back on the slides was we'd like to, we're trying to hold off to see if we can get the in-person going. I know Peter's pushing to do the online stuff. The challenge that I have with it right now is that, we didn't get to do as many live in-person sessions to videotape them to provide an online version. My goal was to have, you take certain lessons on your own, come to class a few days later, and then have videos of the live sessions where just so much more content provided. I think we could do it, and you wouldn't know the difference because you haven't done the live sessions if you're doing the virtual. But I really think that it's a much deeper, broader, richer experience to, at least if you're going to do it remotely, to have those live sessions. That's how I did the coaching, and I know how much I enjoyed, pausing the video and answering the questions and going through that process. It was much more rich. We just didn't get a chance with COVID to provide the level of quality video that we wanted. So that's why we're trying to hold off. In the end, if we can't, we'll figure out a solution, because we do want to get people going with this type of information because they want to get going with their careers as well. Like I mentioned, here's the 3 days a week, 3.5 hours for 8 weeks, a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday. Depending if we get certain requests for a Sunday or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we can do it, but it's just trying to work with everybody's schedule and make it appealing to everybody. The cost for that course is $2,500, $2,499, but $2,500 US, and it's a 90-hour course, and it's good. What else? So you need to get hired to gain that experience. The PL license doesn't build skills or confidence or reduce the risk that employers face. So everything, you're only as good as your last file. I talked about it earlier. It's just so often, I spend a lot of time talking to people on the phone that call the office here, and they're asking, how do I get my license? And I take the time, like I am now, to say the license is irrelevant. It's relevant in the sense that in the 100, the first exercise you do is you go and you do the research. So I'll give it away. The first exercise is regional licensing requirements. So the task is for you to figure it out. If you go to our blog and type in your state or your province or your country, we have all the answers there. So we make it easy to find those answers. But really, basically a certain age, you don't have a criminal record, certain qualifications to start the licensing process. Those are the basic, it's regulatory in nature. Most states, provinces, countries that have some sort of program, it ends up being regulatory in nature. What I mean by that is, you can't put a tracking device on my vehicle, privacy, certain privacy laws. I think it's really important, but at the end of the day, they're not necessarily hit the ground running skills. And so it's to make sure that there's no liability on the government or regulatory side of things, that you're not doing things that are breaking the law, thinking that you have the right to do these things. So these courses are foundational. You'll get meaningful and tangible skills, and again, have an impact on your ability to produce. So when you're new, and you really have no, transferable skills, say like as a detective or even on the intelligence side in government or something like that, there's still challenges for those individuals. But even if you're even like myself, who don't have a law enforcement or intelligence background, I started in this business, security, and moved into the investigations years ago. And I've learned through trial and error, some mentors, and a lot of mistakes. And so the goal when you're new is to try and eliminate those, not eliminate, but reduce the mistakes. The reason being is, if I'm honest as an employer, when I hire somebody new, let's say they take the 2 courses, let's say they have some transferable skills, and then we go, okay, we're going to take a chance, we're going to get you, we're going to mentor you, we're going to invest in you, you've invested in yourself, you've done everything. There's still this component of, can you do it, right? There's still a component like anything. Are you, in the electrician example I give sometimes, it's like, without some of these courses and the ones hopefully we do and some mentoring, it's like saying, go wire this house and go work with that electrical panel without any training. I mean, the industry should be a journeyman-like process. It really would. In some states and some provinces, it's treated like that with a graduated licensing program, but it's 2,000 hours and it's really the onus is on the employer. And not every employer, not every company has a broad set of work or is good at teaching. And so, the gap that we saw with trying to create these courses is to really benefit you, so that when you're starting, you're having an impact, you're producing an impact on a file that allows the employer to go, this is the person I want to continue to ask. Because the reality is when they're new, you're under a microscope. It's not fair, but you're under a microscope. And if you make a really bad mistake, it's just like, I don't know. It's just when, there's this balance of, do I want to continue to invest in this individual because it's a lot of time and money, there's an equation there. For myself, I know how I think. I think I'm pretty level-headed when it comes to that. Give people a lot of time, but I'm very selective on who those individuals are. I can't say for other companies whether their selection process is that thoughtful. So what you're going to face is this sort of steep learning curve with expectations that are unrealistic. Sorry to disappoint you that it's not something else, but I think a lot of people who want to be in this space have a character and a mindset that can overcome those things with proper training and good mentorship and an opportunity to prove themselves. So most of the people in the industry today are of that variety. It's not like a training program existed that was super quality in the past. We're trying to fill that gap to some degree. There are some good courses out there, but I think a little bit different approach than ours in some cases. And so again, we want you to be impactful right away, reduce or eliminate, but also have some skills, build some confidence, and have an impact early on. Because I think that's really critical for having early successes, both for you and both for your employer to see. So definition from knowing what you need to do and doing it because you want to. One of my favorite quotes, ICPI 100 will hopefully give you some perspective on knowing what you want to do. And then, the 101 will give you a nice solid foundation. Peter and I struggled with the two courses on one thing, how much to put into it. There's a lot more that we'd love to tell you. I think what I've learned over the years, before we had this format, similar informational download would happen through onboarding processes and different organizations I've been involved with. We had different processes, but at the end of the day, you can sit with someone, take them on a ride along and download all day. I mean, it's overwhelming for people. So at least in this format, you can go back, you can sit on it for a day. The one good thing about the non-intensive is that you do have that day to digest in between where you're like, okay, you can go back. It's not as intense. There's some pros and cons of those two different formats, but what we've landed on here, if you need 100 layers to be ideally in the right place to start, we're going to give you like 60 to 70. The 30 is just something that is too much. I think the rest of it comes through ongoing professional development once you're in, good mentoring, and also just being self-aware through the early days. I think that this is as much as it can be downloaded and understood in a really meaningful way until you get that experience. I think my hope is, and the feedback that we've had so far is, that what we teach you in the 100 and the 101, it just sort of clicks at some point in time in the first several months where you're like, oh, I understand that, depending on what you end up doing, right? So we don't go into a certain degree of detail per discipline. So we don't talk about report writing interviewing in a great detail. Why? Because it's a specialty on its own. Surveillance, we spend a lot of time on. Why? Because there's a lot of fundamentals you need to know if you're going to get into that arena. And for many of you, it's a good place to start. Online investigations, we dig into a little bit, give you some foundational stuff. But again, that whole genre is changing all the time, and so requires ongoing. So, again, there's only so much we can do in a fundamental course, but these two, coupled with the report writing course, I think are super attractive for companies out there. Certainly for me, these days, anybody who comes to the table with these courses gets a hard look. Degrees are great. People ask me in these sessions, well, what emphasis do you put on education? I said, yeah, we put a ton of emphasis on education. But if I'm honest with you, there's some people and some students, this is all I want to do. I don't want to go to university right now. I said, fine, take the course, try and get hired. Certainly, going the route of any traditional education, there's lots of courses out there that benefit and cross over. But if this is what you want to do, the goal for us here is to give you the opportunity to get hired, and nothing in this industry replaces just doing the job and doing it repetitively and learning and gaining skills through experience. And so that's our approach. The floor is open for questions.